Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Dog Q&A. This is number 47. And today we've got Jesse back with us. So Dr. Jesse McClure, he's talking about separation anxiety in dogs in our series. And this is week 2 with him. So let's get Jesse on and we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, Jesse.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
So last week we kind of talked about what separation anxiety is, what it's not. Maybe it's your dog's fear of missing out on something. And I've got my FOMO dog right outside the door, waiting for the next big fun thing that I'm about to do, which might be walking out the door. So let's today talk about, once you determine you're with a client and you've determined, okay, this could be separation anxiety, how do we know for sure? What do you do next?
What do we do next is probably the better question. How do we know for sure? I would kind of argue we never do. I mean, to me, there's not a perfect line between is it this or is it that? But certainly if they've come to me or come to you or come to any of us for help with separation anxiety, there is a concern that needs to be addressed. And so what we do next is we assess I almost said how severe, and that's not what it is. It's not, but what the time course is, what the dog is actually doing, and that's where we need real data. We need to see what is really happening, not what we expect, not what we believe. And actually, I met with a client yesterday, not working on separation issues, but they were kind of concerned that they've been at home with their dog through the whole pandemic. The dog has anxiety issues, and they're concerned that once they go back to the office, it might be an issue. And so I'm talking to them about preventative stuff, which we might get into in this later in the series. But they suspected that their dog might have separation issues. The reason was because in the short periods that they have left him recently, when they go to the grocery store or something like that, they as they walk out, the dog follows them to the door, kind of wants, the FOMO dog wants to stay with them, follows them right to the door and is sitting at the door watching them drive off. And then when they get home, the dog is sitting there right at the door waiting for them to come in. And I said, well, you don't have any idea what your dog is doing in between those times. And they just assume that the dog is sitting right at the door, anxiously waiting for them. I don't think that's likely. But frankly, it doesn't matter whether I think it's likely. We can monitor what is happening. And the fun thing is that client has a internal security system in their home with cameras that they haven't turned on. I said, well, just turn it on and see what happens. When you're away, does your dog go relax on the couch? What actually happens? And with that, so I guess I'm kind of jumping ahead. So that is the first step, is to get video is ideal, and video with audio is even better, so that you can determine, I think we mentioned this last time, you can determine if the dog might be whining, laying there whining and trembling versus laying there snoring or laying there quietly and calmly. Those can look fairly similar, but they sound different. So having a video with sound is really handy. And when you look at that, go ahead.
I think that's a good point. Is I feel like there's some evidence that's causing the person concern.
Yes.
So whether the dog, excuse me, is sitting at the door when they leave, or they come home and the entire room is destroyed.
Yeah.
So somewhere in that range, something has happened. And then you can say, okay, well, let's find out what's the missing part that we're not seeing in between when you leave and you come back, and chaos has ensued or not. We don't know. So let's find out. And so that's a great point. And a lot of people do have cameras now, inside, outside, everywhere. And it's funny that there's one that's not turned on. It's like, we have the system in place. Now we just have to implement it.
And actually, something you just mentioned made me realize I kind of skipped an important step. Is what do they see? What brought them to us? So usually that's before we talk about get a camera, set it up, monitor. Is what brought you to me today? And so, and I think we said this last time. Well, I'm worried my dog has separation anxiety. I said, okay, what does that mean? what really brought, and that's not the way I would say it to a client, but it's like you've got to dig and you've got to drill into that. What really led you to that suspicion or that concern? Well, my dog tore up the couch while I was away. That's valuable. That's information. But does that mean it's separation anxiety? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the dog has destructive chewing. And there's many other causes for that and many different approaches if it's not actually separation distress or separation anxiety. Or the dog soiled all over, the dog peed everywhere. Well, how is house training going? And, so it's not, those are the most obvious cues that people will get. If you leave your dog at home alone and you come back and the couch is torn up and there's pee everywhere, separation anxiety is a good hypothesis, but you don't know for sure. It's a good thing to check. It's a good thing to test. But in a lot of cases, a separation anxiety a separation anxiety dog will not be that obvious. You may not come home to a destroyed home or a soiled home. So some of the signs that you might look for in that video is those obvious ones that will still be there when you get back, destruction and soiling, or the ones that you'll be told about by your neighbors, the dog barking, howling, maybe not whining, the neighbors might not notice that, but really being excessively vocal. Your neighbors will tell you. And so most of the time when somebody comes to one of us for separation anxiety, those are the primary things those might be the only things they know. Well, my landlord is complaining that my dog is barking. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So you set up the camera, and I actually, nowadays you can go on Amazon and get these little indoor security cameras, nanny cameras for $20, $30. There's lots of them, and pretty much any of them will do. I actually also ran into another interesting suggestion recently of getting an old smartphone. People are throwing these things away now. A little cracked screen, it's no good for them anymore. A cracked screen with a camera, hook it up to your Wi-Fi. There are apps certainly for Android where you can put on that and just run that app, prop up the phone where it can see the dog, and you can log in from somewhere else. So you don't even necessarily need to buy new equipment if you've got old stuff around. But when you get that video, you want to share that video with the trainer or whoever you're working with. And one trainer, right, works a lot with separation anxiety. In the initial evaluation, she wants to see that video, but she doesn't always. She has a discussion with the client whether they want to see it, because it's what the client sees and what the trainer sees is going to be different for two very important reasons. One, you need to understand dog body language. You need to and there's the skill and the profession that we develop. But another important part is even us professionals, we're not going to be very good at assessing our own dog. When you watch your own dog, you're going to have all sorts of biases in both directions. You might be biased to think, oh, he's okay, he'll get through this. Or you might be biased saying, oh Lord, my Fluffy is suffering. And you need to have a little bit of a professional detachment, say what is actually happening. At 30 seconds, the dog gets up and starts pacing. At 45 seconds, the dog walks towards the door. At 1 minute, the dog is scratching at the door. And with that data, we can then say how long or how short of a isolation or of a separation can we start with? And that actually leads a little bit into the treatment side, is how do you actually then work up to that?
Yeah, that's okay. So many good points there. I think the one thing is the interpretation of the video, because a lot of times I'll get the video, the person records it, they watch it, they send it to me with their interpretation.
Mhm.
I think we also, as trainers, can't fully interpret the data either without knowing the dog and the context. And it reminded me of a story I heard from a trainer at a conference. Those are always the most interesting stories. They save it for the audience. There was a trainer working with a family that had 2 Weimaraners, so high energy breeds. They were normally sort of couch potato dogs, except for Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. You think, okay, something unusual is going on. And I immediately think to, are they hearing something? Is something out there that they're perceiving at this day and time every week? It turns out that a couple miles away, they were blasting at a quarry on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. And then the dogs would go nuts, destroy the room, and then go back to being couch potatoes when it was over. So,
Mhm.
how they found that out was miraculous. But sometimes we don't get that other piece of information that
Yeah.
the dogs hear this thing that we don't know about and may never know about. But it was easier because it was narrowed down to a point.
Mhm.
We don't always get that luxury, but sometimes it's something unusual.
So that's why I think there are two aspects of data collection that come from that. One is that it's often useful to have two, or actually we'll come to three in a second, but having two kind of baseline videos or recordings. And there's two potential reasons. One is, especially if in your baseline video the dog is relatively calm and then there's the sudden change. Can we repeat that? I mean, is it really that at 5 minutes the dog just loses it? Or is it that at 5 minutes there was blasting in a quarry a couple miles away? So that, does it replicate? But another baseline video that is really useful, and this is something I really like, and I don't always get this, but I think it's really useful when we commit to getting this, is get a baseline video of the dog relaxing while the family is home and not interacting with them, just, watching TV, reading a book, whatever the family might be doing, and the dog is just there being themselves. Because we need to, interpreting the body language or the stress signs, we need to put that in the context of that dog. How frequently does that dog get up and pace around the room when he's comfortable? How frequently does that dog yawn when he's comfortable? I don't know, just whatever it is, you need to compare to the baseline. A couch potato dog being stressed is going to look very different from your stereotypical, at least stereotypical border collie when they're stressed. And the stressed couch potato dog might look like the border collie when they're calm. So we need that baseline. It's a change from baseline is what we're really watching for.
Yeah, that's a great point. A deviation from the norm kind of
Mhm.
thing. And that's why it's so important. Most people, I feel like, know their dogs pretty well.
Mhm.
You learn, at least some of the things, their quirks, their personality traits, and they kind of manage things.
Yeah.
They set up a system to manage their dog. And when something's out of the ordinary is usually when we get the call.
Mhm.
And a lot of my calls come from, oh, I've always had golden retrievers and now I have a cattle dog, you know, or my dog was always like this and now he's 7 and he's acting like this. He doesn't want to be around dogs anymore. He doesn't want to do this. So it's always when there's a change, I feel like. And I think that's a great way to assess the change is what was your dog normally like, or what
Mhm.
is he normally like? And what's the different thing?
Mhm.
And that's a great way to do it is 2 different videos.
Yeah.
Show us the normal, show us the new thing.
Mhm. Also, I think you touched on this, interpreting the dog's, well, interpreting the body language or the cues or the signals you see in the context of who the dog is. And the owner is going to be, so in a sense, the trainer is going to be most equipped to evaluate those stress signs or that body language. But in another sense, the owner is going to be. And when I discuss, stress signs, body language signals, displacement behavior, whatnot, when I discuss that with clients, I always end up talking about one point where it's important to be aware of what they are, because a lot of dog owners, they know their dog very well, but they're not watching for the right thing. So they might totally overlook some relevant signals. On the flip side, the trainer can be hyper attuned to those signals, and we can do two things wrong. And I think very good trainers do both of these wrong on regular occasion. We overinterpret. We read too much into things. And so I often make an analogy to Freud. Sigmund Freud in human psychology is widely known for, rightly or wrongly, talking about the symbolism of everything. Everything represented something else. But even Freud was at least attributed with the line saying sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes a yawn is just a yawn. Sometimes a lip lick is just a lip lick. So you need to look at, I don't know if holistically is the right word, but you need to look at these signs and these signals, these body language cues, quite holistically and with a knowledge of that dog. Nobody is going to be able to interpret my dog's body language better than me. Nobody is going to be able to interpret my client's dog's body language better than my client. However, my client will be much better at it when they know what things to pay attention to. So my clients, they all know their dog very well, but when I mention some of the common signs of stress, so I mentioned a lip lick where the tongue just flicks out, or a nose lick is similar. They lick their own nose. And people go, oh, yeah, I never even thought about that. And so my goal is not to say, well, you need to track that, but it's like you need to be aware, you need to be watchful for these things. So the nose lick, just staring blankly into space, a paw raise is, whether that's stress or just apprehension, but it's a sign that there's some processing going on. Panting. So knowing all these, and I don't want to keep listing them, but knowing these is important. And there's ample resources online. If you look up stress signs in dogs or dog body language, there's lots of great resources. And I think dog owners should just periodically go through those lists and say, let's watch for these.
Yeah, one of the things, I work with a lot of leash reactive dogs, so I have to give them cues to look for with their dog. And one of the easy things is the ears, like the motion of the ears. But another one I see a lot is the yawning, and at home sometimes with the stretching. And people always say, well, my dog always yawns and stretches when he wakes up. I'm like, well, okay, it's a context thing. Yeah. Because we do the same thing. Sometimes we yawn when we're tired, and sometimes we yawn when we're stressed. Your dog's doing the same thing. He might be stretching because he just got out of bed. So let's look at, is he on a leash walking with you and seeing another dog, or did he just wake up in the morning? I think context, like you're saying, is so huge, and not reading into everything, because I so easily could go there. Yeah. Okay. So what are, Jesse, some of the best ways for people to collect this information about their dogs when they're not home? As far as like cameras and sound recording and where they place the items and all of that.
So yes, cameras and sound recording. So we kind of already touched on that. I don't have any particular recommendations on certain products. And there's, like I said, there's lots of them on Amazon right now, and they change every day. Two reasons I don't recommend any specific ones. One, because probably any of them will do the job. And well, almost any of them. Read the reviews, see what you're getting, but most of them should do fine. The second reason I don't recommend any of them is, despite the fact that I think any of them will do the job just fine, I also suspect that the way products are made now, all of them will give you some form of headache in setting it up or configuring, and I don't want people blaming me for that. So you choose your own camera, just pick your own poison, whatever. But any of them should work. I have highlighted that having audio is useful. Software, usually they come with their own software recommendations, or you can go on the Google Play Store for these apps that work with old phones that you can set up. The really important question, and the really hard question that you asked, is where to put them. That's kind of the $1 million question. If you only have one camera, that's a big issue. If you have an indoor security system that monitors everything, hey, you're in great shape. You've already got them everywhere. So depending on how many cameras you have, you might pick different places. If there are certain places you expect your dog to be, well, obviously that kind of sounds silly. Obviously, that's where you'd put it, but facing where you ideally would most likely see your dog's face, or the front of your dog. Another good place, if it's not the same place, would be near the door. So the door that you leave from, or the door that the dog most frequently leaves from, have the camera pointing inward so you can see any approaches to the door and what the dog is doing. Often just kind of having, if in doubt, I would say if in doubt, take as wide of an angle or as broad of a view as possible. You might lose some of the fine detail if you're taking a whole large room and you're a wide angle on a large room. You're not going to see the details of what the dog is doing when they're over in the corner. But you either get a general picture of their stress level, or at least okay, while I'm gone for 15 minutes, the dog is in that corner. Now let's set up the camera in that corner. So it can be an iterative process of, if you have no idea at first, get as wide of a view as possible.
That's great. So I think our takeaways from today, I'm going to narrow this down a little bit. if you suspect your dog has some form of separation issue when you leave or when you're not there, um, we need some data to tell us what's happening when you're not at home. So get a recording of it with sound in video, as much detail as you can, or not, as long as you can see something. And then send it, instead of maybe watching it yourself, watch it with your trainer. And you can both look at it together and interpret what's going on based on uh, each of your knowledge of your dog. Would that be a good sort of assessment of step 2?
Yep. And you can also, I guess, just going back and you're summing up, another one is, especially over the past year, almost all of us have a camera in our home and software to use it. We're doing it right now. So sometimes you only need to, if you can leave a laptop open and start up Zoom on your laptop and connect to it from your cell phone when you're out and about, and so you can see. But yeah, get the recording, because objective data is what you will need to help your dog, and objective data is what the trainer is going to need to give you, to guide you on helping your dog. So it's always digging when say, well, I'm worried my dog has separation anxiety. Going back to where we started, what does that mean? What does that look like? It's much more useful if the client comes to us and says, I left my home for half an hour the other day. When I came home, the dog had torn up the carpet. I checked I happened to have a video running, internal security. I checked the internal security camera, and I saw that after I left, the dog went and laid down for 5 minutes and then got up and paced for another 30 seconds and then went to the door, scratched at the door for 5 seconds, then ran over to the couch and ate it or whatever. That description is really useful. But saying I left for half an hour and my dog was miserable and had separation anxiety, we need more. We need to know what that looks like.
Yeah, and so this is, for today, the best thing is to collect this data so that when we do our video next week, we can talk about what do we do with it, whether, whatever label you want to put on it. Here's the information we have. Now, how do we address this to make your dog happier or more content, and to make you more content with your dog? So we'll get into that next week, Jesse. And thank you so much for coming on again. And we'll put Jesse's information again in the description. So if you want to contact him for dog training, specifically fear-based issues, anxiety, aggression, anything like that, he's available. All right. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So we're going to stop there for today. And then next week, we'll be back with Jesse for week 3 in our separation anxiety series. All right. Bye, everyone.